You're probably wondering where that story comes from. Actually, it comes from a very strange place. It comes from a letter that I wrote to President Gorbachev in 1988. At that time, President Gorbachev, I thought, was in the process of bringing down the walls, making things a little bit easier for everybody in the former Soviet Union and all of the countries that they controlled at that time. Meanwhile, over on the other side of the world, President Reagan was talking about Star Wars, about missiles in space. And I was thinking that all of this war going on, shouldn't we be more concentrated on the Earth? And if we're going to go up into space, shouldn't we be looking back at the planet instead of thinking about conquering it like we usually do, going off and, colonising some other planet? And I thought, maybe we should be using it for peace. So I pondered, who do I write the letter to? Reagan or Gorbachev? I chose Gorbachev because I figured that they've been up in space a long time, the Soviet Union, and he seemed to be open to change. So I wrote him a letter, and in the letter I said, have you thought about sending, instead of just scientists into space, artists, poets, philosophers, free thinkers, people with a vision who, when he got up into space, would look back on this Earth and would be able to explain in simple ways to the population of the planet, not just the scientists, but to everybody, in simple ways about how beautiful this planet is, how it is such a treasure, how it is the only one we have. And then through their words and creations, be able to inspire positive actions on behalf of the planet and the natural environment that we need to exist. Well, when I wrote that letter, I was very concerned, to be honest, that I was going to get a knock on the door from the CIA and then later have my fingernails pulled out because I was conversing with the so-called enemy. I even sealed the letter with trust. I wrote on the outside of the envelope, sealed in trust. And I was in Canada, so I sent it to the Russian embassy in Ottawa and then promptly forgot about it for the next few weeks. Until one day I received a package back from the Soviet embassy, saying that President Gorbachev had read the letter and had sent me this book called Space Flights Serve Life on Earth. And basically it was a cosmonaut's training manual, and it had all sorts of things in there that I could not understand. Talking about cameras with infrared and all of this sort of stuff. But it was so interesting that, I read as much of it as I could. And one of the things I came out with was the magnetosphere. I came to understand the different layers of the Earth and how the magnetosphere trails off behind the planet, far above the atmosphere, like a cone. And then I thought, that's it. I'll write a story about the Earth being like an ice cream with a cone. And it's amazing how far that story went. I had the story all finished at the start of 1989, and by 1991 I was in Dallas, Texas, on my walk from Canada down to South America, staying at the home of a journalist. And he said, Paul, there's a Soviet space exhibit going on in Fort Worth. It's the first one they've ever done. And all of the space team's going to be there, and the cosmonauts. And they're having a special media gathering tomorrow before it opens. Shall we see if we can go? And I said, yeah, sure, I'd love to meet a cosmonaut. Anyway, the next day, he called him up, mentioned this letter that I wrote to Gorbachev, the very positive response I got back, and they invited me, NASA invited me to come along and meet up with the Soviet space team. So I went to this meeting, sat at a table, which was quite interesting because in the centre there was a bunch of artificial flowers. It was a big round table. And it actually looked to me like maybe there was omnidirectional microphones in each one because they were pointing towards every seat that you could sit at. So anyway, I went from the director of Soviet education to the minister of Soviet education, Soviet space program. I was able to talk to them all. I finally ended up with the director of space education, and I was telling him the story about the scientists and the ice cream, and how I said I'd love to see it as a program in a school, where a real practical program where the kids could begin with start building a paper mache planet, the core of the Earth, and then add the different layers to it. And along the way, over the course of a semester or a year, they could create this planet in the school from elementary age up. And by the time they come to the surface, they understand how the planet works. And then the next year or semester, then they could start on the cone, and the cone could be like an upside-down pyramid of life. And you could explain all of the creatures that you've got in this cone that you're building, so they would learn by practical hands-on experience, all the creatures that exist on this planet and the pyramid of life. And then I said, and at the end of it, you could then take the pyramid of life, and then put the planet on top, and what do you have? You have an ice cream, and you can tell them a story of the scientists and the ice cream in Salvador or the ant. Well, the director of Soviet space education, who looked like Boris Yeltsin, big stocky guy, literally got up and gave me a great big hug. Oh. He said, anytime you want to work with the Soviet space team on a humanitarian cause, so tell me. And then he went on to explain that the way they trained, one of the ways they trained the cosmonauts about space was through fairy tales. And he showed me these beautiful slides, these gorgeous slides that they have of these ancient stories that they have on space. And they were gorgeously illustrated. So that's how they were training the cosmonauts. A little while later, because I wanted to meet a cosmonaut, I got the chance. I was going off to speak to a radio interview, and he was going to do a TV interview, and quite by chance we met, and it was really cool because we were in this, where we met, we were passing through this sort of sphere with all of the stars all lit up. And then the translator said, he's very busy, you got time for maybe one question. So I said to the cosmonaut, I said, if there's anything, words that you could leave for kids of the future, what would they be? And he thought about it for quite a while, really. I was quite surprised. And then he said, I've never been asked that question. And I thought, oh, that's good. Ask him something unusual. And he said, I envy them. I envy them their time on this earth and their time in space. And I thought that was so positive and so beautiful. And so, as I continued my walk, I was able to go through places like Mexico, all the way through Central and South America, speaking at schools, and I would always tell them about the spaceman I had met. That's the beauty of fairy tales. Fairy tales are born out of reality, and if you work hard at it, fairy tales can become reality.